Mr. Harper, thanks again for agreeing to an interview. I just want to get your response to yesterday's editorial in our Jersey's only newspaper, the Jersey Evening Post. Firstly, I'd like your idea of their interpretation of the word whistleblower. To us it seems misplaced. Yourself and Graham Power have never been called whistleblowers.
No, we weren't, but I suppose we were carrying out the duties of our lawfully appointed posts, and we never ever did anything that was against the law, or at least it wouldn't be if you weren't a whistleblower. It's bizarre, the JEP's interpretation of the term whistleblower, and I've written a letter to them in which I raised the point that I wonder how many times they called a certain senator who's just finished a term of imprisonment in Jersey a whistleblower for releasing the information he did. I mean, how they can make the jump from an unlawful, potentially unlawful release of information to a journalist who is a known supporter of paedophiles and equate that with somebody releasing information into the public domain and the public interest itself is absolutely unbelievable. There's absolutely no way that what Mr. Gradwell did could in any way be described as whistleblowing. It was absolutely, it's a bizarre, and I think it's the bluster of people who have been caught out and who have been totally embarrassed and who are now got their backs to the wall.
Well, yeah, that's we agree. Now, what I want to say is that, because let's remember, two former politicians and a current politician, Deputy Sean Power, actually, were making a bit of a scene that you might have leaked something to the news of the world. So, as though, if true, it was a bad thing. Again, they weren't heralding you or anybody else. If you were leaking something to the news of the world, you weren't the whistleblower.
No, that's absolutely right. I think the first thing to emphasise is that I leaked nothing whatsoever to the news of the world. And we've said that many times before. Yourselves have published that, you've shown it, and I have repeated it often. I think that it goes back to the pattern that I was talking about a little while ago, that anything that tends to try and bring the evidence of the abuse victims and survivors to the forefront and to show the ordeal that they went through is a bad thing in these people's eyes. But anything that goes towards assisting and continuing the cover-up of the previous few decades, well then that's obviously whistleblowing. It's a perverted sense of what constitutes good and bad, and I think that's prevalent amongst those who have been trying to cover up this child abuse from day one.
Well, yeah, good. Again, in the JEP editorial, they said that you were chasing forensic evidence that didn't exist. What do you say about that?
Well, it didn't exist in the mind of Mr. Gradwell, obviously. I mean, neither did the sellers. I mean, in Mr. Gradwell's mind, they were turned into 18-inch voids. But Bob Hill and others, the BBC among them, showed that to be nonsense, and anybody who wants to find the truth about that just has to go on YouTube. As for the other forensic evidence, I mean, the bones that were fleshed and fresh when they were burnt and buried, that wasn't forensic, it didn't exist. Although again, after Mr. Gradwell and Mr. Warcup and others had finished with it, you would think it didn't exist because it's just been completely forgotten about. But it exists, it's there, the documents are in the public domain, or at least they should be. So there were ample forensic evidence there that existed, and it's just, again, it's just repeating the lie that there was no forensic evidence. And if you repeat something often enough and refuse to give the truthful account, then eventually some people who are perhaps not familiar with the facts will start to believe it.
Well, again, but so it appears to us that the Jersey Evening Post are totally ignoring the four ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers reports. They're even ignoring the Wiltshire report that said it was right to dig at Hotel Agarin. They seem to be just ignoring that. Do you get that impression?
Absolutely. I mean, we all knew it was right. We all knew that there was no other choice to go into Hotel Agarin and start digging. We didn't know what we were going to find. But imagine the welter of criticism that would have descended on our heads if we hadn't. ACPO made this clear. Not only ACPO made it clear, but Wiltshire made it clear as well. And Wiltshire were seeking to do us no favours. It has to be said. Graham demolished the veracity of that report very, very easily. and I'm now waiting the outcome of complaints through the IPCC as to the behaviour of Wiltshire, but we shall see about that in due course. No, I mean, the decision to go into dig at Hope de la Garonne was another one which the JEP and some others have totally turned on its head. Everybody who has looked at it has come to the conclusion, some of them reluctantly, that there was no choice but to go in and dig, and that's where we stand.
Here is what the JEP and none of our accredited media or our state media, as they've become known, they didn't ask the glaring question in their editorial about to Ian Lamarca. They haven't asked the glaring question that everybody else is asking. Why Ian Lamarca supposedly found out about this alleged leak from Gradwell in late 2009, early 2010. Why, oh why, didn't Ian Lamarca tell us about it?
Well, that puts a big question mark against Mr. Lamarca's motivation as well, doesn't it? I mean, he's trying to portray himself as this honest Jim, and all the evidence points towards the fact that he chose to believe what Gradwell was saying, and he probably had a suspicion that what he was saying wasn't true, but because it suited his agenda, he went along with it, and that makes him almost as bad as the rest of them. And I think, as I say, you have to question the motivation of Mr. Lamarca when he knew this, and he continued to criticise myself and others for non-existent leaks to the media, when all the time he knew that Mr. Gradwell was leaking confidential information, which, remember, the Chief Constable of Wiltshire had said was so confidential that it was exempt from the Freedom of Information Act in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, Ian Lamarca put that out all over the place. But I don't know if you've read the response to the scrutiny sub-panels review on the BDO Alta thing. Ian Lamarca has said the fact that he wasn't asked the question about Gradwell allegedly leaking, he didn't offer the information, and he thinks that's credible, you know, as a Home Affairs Minister, if he's not asked something, not to mention it.
Well, it goes back to the old maxim of being economical with the truth, doesn't it? He's obviously hiding behind that because he believes that's okay. I mean, it's nonsense. If you're there to give information to an inquiry, no matter what it is, and you have information which is vital to one side or the other of that inquiry, you have a duty to put that evidence before the inquiry. To say that you weren't asked it is a nonsense. It's like a witness in court who's on their oath not giving vital evidence because nobody thought to ask him. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, that's part of a course in Jersey, unfortunately, and of course we don't seem to have an independent media over here besides bloggers, but that's another story. Now, it's what I don't understand is, well, I do understand, because in the second paragraph of the Jersey Evening Post editorial, up springs the good name of Jersey being dragged through the mud, and it appears somewhere else in that editorial. This is what it's about, isn't it? It's Jersey's reputation.
Yes, and I'm not even so sure it's Jersey's reputation. It's the reputation of a few who are in places of authority in Jersey, who have connived and schemed and frankly broken the law in their efforts to hide this child abuse. I think that there are enough decent people in Jersey that the reputation of Jersey itself as a community is not that an issue, but it's the reputation of the rogues and vagabonds who are running the show in Jersey. It's their reputation that is being dragged through the mud, and the more they resist the truth, the more that reputation is seen by everybody to be ridiculous. I've been reading criticism this week from sources in America who are absolutely critical and comparing it to all sorts of regimes, and that's in America. So it's the reputation of those people that's being dragged through the mud, and that's what they're trying to prevent.
Yeah, so Mick Gradwell, as we've said in the past, he was no shrinking violet when he was giving all this these interviews to Jersey state media. Interestingly, he refused to give evidence to the scrutiny sub-panel chaired by Deputy Trevor Pittman, and he wasn't available for comments with the Jersey Evening Post. What do you read into that?
He's away auditioning for the new film The Invisible Man, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, this is. He said he would come back and give evidence to any committee of inquiry set up to deal with the Hope de la Garonne ending, and he's nowhere to be seen.
No, well, the truth is he's been caught out, hasn't he? He's been caught out with all the misinformation that he gave out about the cellars, about the bones and everything else, and he's just been caught red-handed. And he's disappeared. I mean, you can't rely on his word. He said he would come back and give evidence anywhere, and yet he failed that at the first. He failed it at the first hurdle, and the reason is obvious. I mean, Bob Hill, the BBC, and others tore his nonsense about the cellars to shreds, and everything else that he said has been proven to be wrong as well. And instead of being this wonderful SIO that the Jersey Evening Post made him out to be, in fact, he made terrible basic mistakes in relation to exhibits in the case, and that's putting it at its very kindest.
Yeah. Well, what I want to get on here is the huge part. I mean, this editorial in the Jersey Evening Post. Nowhere in that editorial were the victims of child abuse mentioned, even recognised. Do you read anything into that?
Well, yes, the senior editorial staff of the Jersey Evening Post don't want them to be recognised. They don't want them to be believed. They don't want them to be given the justice that they so obviously deserve. The Jersey Evening Post want to go back to the situation as it was in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, where the establishment were able just to push these allegations away and to bully and intimidate the victims into going away. That's what the Jersey Evening Post senior editorial staff want.